Okay, sandali lang, mag-intro ako. Mag-intro lang, sandali lang. Wait ka lang. Okay, intro lang ako, no? Mag-intro lang ako, sandali lang. Okay, ang check-in time natin na 10 minutos, pasado alas 8. Okay, sa programa natin sa gabing ito. Dito po sa Consolidated News natin. Okay, dito po sa ADLSNTV Corporation. Sa programa Halo-Halo Special Opinion Balita at iba pa, no? Okay, kasama po Serbisyo Publiko Tinig ng Mamamayan. And then, sumbungan ng mamamayan, mga kababayan, no? Magandang gabi. Good evening. Okay, yung global greeting natin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, no? Okay. Unahin po natin si Tarhata Abdul Karim kasi malayo pang uwian niya basta after itong mag-report kasi uwi pa siya doon sa kanilang bayan. Okay, go ahead, Tata. Go ahead. Go ahead na. Intro mo. Sige na.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Hello, sir.
Okay na. Mag-report ka na.
Okay lang ba yung background ni Pasina? Parang dinunod ko.
Okay lang ang background. Okay lang. Sige na.
Okay, maraming salamat sa lahat. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Sa lahat ng mga pag-ibig at pag-ibig sa and Service Public Tinig ng Mamamayan. At sa ating ulat mula sa ating area of responsibility, at ito ngayon ang babala si Today Above Director Hills Castro sa lahat ng mga taong nalakangkot sa mga kaluparan ang itinaghabawal na gamot. Ayon pa sa kanya, we will see each other someday somewhere sometime. At ito lamang, isa lamang ang naging babalik ni Today Above Director Hills Castro sa ginawang panahon sa kanya. Nakaraan itinatawag ito ng first conference ng Today. So, binigyan din ng bagong upong Today Director na walang sinang palalampasin ang Today sa kanyang pamumuno mula sa mga tinuturing na small town maging ang mga high-value target personality. At tatandaan itong mga nakalipas na araw ay naging sunod-sunod umano ang mga ginagawang operasyon ng Today kung saan nag-resulta ng nasa-gumpay na pagkakasamsan na mga hinihinala sa mga suro, kakahalaga ng nasa halos 11 million pesos. Dagdag pa ni Today Director Hills Castro, meron ng mga nailatag na mga game plan ang Today para sa lahat ng mga taong sangkot sa illegal na droga. Mas pinilitan niya huwag nang magbigang yung komito ng sosyal sa kanang mayroon ba mga politiko o mga narco-politicians ang kabilang sa mga kanilang listahan. So, sa kanilang huli na listahan nila nawagan ng sosyal sa lahat ng mamamayan na nakipagtulungan na huwag hayaan makapasok ang hindi pinagbabawal sa nagamot sa kanilang bansamuro at ang Muslim ginawa. Samantala, sa iba pang ulat, hearing program ng barangay drug ang barangay drug clearing program ay sinagawa dito sa resort ng Cotabato, particularly sa Sagana Restaurant. So, ilan sa mga lalawigan ng ilan sa mga barangay sa lalawigan ng Maguindanao del Sur ay nandito sila sa ilalim ngayon sa barangay drug clearing program ng PDL1 at ito sa pangunan mismo ni PDL1 ang sila director here sa Newcastle. So, isinagawa kanina mula umaga hanggang hapon ngayong araw-araw ng August, So, saka iba pang drug cleared barangay sa Maguindanao del Sur, kasamang ads ay mula sa Dato Angay Timbang. Meron din sa pangunan ng kanilang alkalde at sa Radyo Hulayan, Malipulok, at sa barangay ng Mama sa Pano, Pupanalipay, sa Dato Paglas Alit, sa Bulan din, sa Litay Mas Labing, at sa Dato Piang Huayan, sa Dato Piang Maguindanao. So, diba sa mga barangay na isinailalim sa drug clearing kanina, meron din siyang na barangay na sa Maguindanao del Sur ang nag-sustain ang pagiging drug free, So, ito ay ang Upi, Bayabas, Initial 5, Sunipalbuak, Pinabagong, 5 Mantaw sa Bento, sa datong Ampatuan. At ayon sa Pidila, sa kanilang talaan, sa Javan ay wala sa 268 barangay sa Maguindanao del Sur ay nasa 38 barangay na lamang ang hindi pa nailalim sa drug clearing. At hindi pa ito nadideklarang drug clearing ng Pidila Bag. Okay? So, sa ating iba pang sa ating ulit-ulat ngayon Sir At,
Go ahead.
nagkaroon ng general meeting ang Cotabato City na liga ng mga barangay. Sinagawa ito kahapon ito, January 6, 2024. Ito ay sinagawa sa may Soria Hall, sa kanto ng Robinson Mall of Nur, Cotabato City Bar. Ang nagsabi ng mga liga ng barangay sa Cotabato City ay ito ay sa pangungunan ito ay nasa pangungunan na Barangay Population 7, Vice President, Honorable Sulaiman Atwood. At sa Barangay Population 9 naman, Chairman Honorable Jonas Cap, Jonas, at Chairman Cap Jonas Muhammad Amara, tumatay bilang Vice President. Okay? Vice President ng nasabing liga ng barangay. And isa sa pinag-usapan ng mga newly elected officials ay ang mga establishmento ng mga liga ng barangay office at iba't pang mga programa. So, isa sa layunin na pagpupulong nito ay upang magkaroon at pagpamala sa buong sambayanang Cotabateños na ang liga ng barangay sa Cotabato ay buo at nakakaisang at hindi ito nagbibigay ng kaguluhan dito sa Cotabato. At isa rin sa naging impact ng pagpupulong ay ang pagbuo ng position paper para sa buong distrito sa Cotabato City na kung saan kung may mga barangay na sa tingin ng mga lugar ng mga barangay ng Cotabato ay hindi dapat na magkahiwalay. No? So, ang naturang position paper ay naturang position paper sa lahat ay papasa daw umano ito sa Bangsamoro Parliament kung saan ngayon ay talagang pinag-usapan sa Parliament ang kasalukuyang pagbuo ng mga distrito sa buong ng Bangsamoro Autonomous Region Muslim ng Mindanao.
Okay, ilang district?
So, yun lang natin plus.
Ilang district ang Cotabato City?
27.
Ganun ba? Okay. Sige. Extra ka na.
So, kaya na nga pulat India, kapag news contributor din sa mga news online, maraming malalaw. Kapag news sa kapagbalita, kaya Bersarin, the news on ADLSNTV news online sa Tabat City Bank.
Salamat. Okay, si Tata Abdul Karim, no? Okay. Droga ang report niya ay nandyan sa Hill Cesario, no? Okay, galing yan sa Jensen. Kilala natin yan. Okay, lagi tayo doon sa opisina niya. Okay, nung nariyan ako sa Jensen, no? Okay, magaling na director yan. Okay. Okay, Sunday lang. Balikan naman natin ng ibang balita po mga kababayan, no? Okay. Are Israel's attempt to demoralize, okay, the Palestinian backfiring. Okay, are Israel attempt to demoralize the Palestinian backfiring, na? Okay, pakinggan natin po itong ang balita ito mga kababayan, no? Unahin natin ito. Okay, pagtutok pa rin natin sa loob ng Gaza Strip mga kababayan.
Hamas, which launched an attack on October 7th, killing 1,200 Israelis and taking more than 200 as captives. More than 100 of those captives have now been released during a pause in the fighting, but there are no signs of a ceasefire now. So where is the war heading, and how is it affecting the wider region and the U.S.? Today we're talking with Stephen Cook, Senior Fellow for the Middle East and North Africa at the Council on Foreign Relations, and author of the upcoming book, The End of Ambition, America's Past, Present, and Future in the Middle East. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. Let me start with the book, The End of Ambition. What should our ambition be in a region right now that is convulsing violently? It's got to be one of the worst conflicts in this modern era when you look at the rate of death going on. I mean, you have written a piece in Foreign Policy magazine saying there's really no hope for any option.
Yeah, it's really the worst conflict that I've encountered in my 20 years working on the Middle East. As I came into this just as the United States was invading Iraq, and as you point out, the casualty figures in such a short period of time are indeed quite shocking. The problem is that any idea that anybody might have with regard to finally resolving the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis have either been tried before or are politically non-starters. We are at a stalemate between Palestinians and Israelis, and we were at that stalemate even before this conflict began. That is to say that the minimum requirements that the Palestinians have for peace are things that the Israelis politically are unable to deliver, and that Israel's minimum requirements for peace are things that politically the Palestinians are unable to deliver. And so we have stalemate, we have continued settlement, which looks more and more like annexation, and of course, periodic spasms of horrific violence like we've been seeing since October 7th.
Is the United States, I want to focus on the U.S. debate for a moment. It seems so Orwellian to me. You know, I know Matthew Miller, who's the Department of State spokesperson, and he made this statement.
I have not seen evidence of their intention to kill civilians. We believe that far too many civilians have been killed. But again, this goes back to the underlying problem of this entire situation.
I also hear Lloyd Austin say that Israel risks strategic defeat unless it moves to protect Palestinian civilians. And I'm like, is anybody watching the TVs, hearing the UN? We've seen what's going on, but is there a kind of willful disregard for the fact that, you know, to the point of Matthew Miller, yes, we're seeing civilians intentionally killed.
Well, this is, I think, the most difficult issue in this conflict, and the United States is stuck here because the president believed that if he hugged the Israelis, he could shape their military operations, which I think given be totally supportive of Netanyahu, come in and whisper in his ear and say, "Don't be so bad." Right? Exactly. How's that going? How's that strategy? I think it was a miscalculation, and I think it's surprising that it was a miscalculation because of the way in which the Israelis have framed this conflict. After what happened on October 7th, footage that, if you have seen it, is shocking. Words don't actually capture how shocking and violent and, quite honestly, barbaric that those attacks were. And subsequently, the Israelis have defined this conflict in existential terms. And I think that the administration miscalculated, not understanding, or at least underestimating the way in which the Israelis were going to pursue their military operations, given the fact that they had defined this conflict in existential terms, and overestimating their ability to shape the way in which these military operations are unfolding. There's clearly an effort on the part of the Israelis to demoralize Palestinian society, and in this way separate them from Hamas. I think we can see from whatever public opinion we can glean from Gaza and the West Bank, quite honestly, that this is having actually the opposite effect.
Stephen, we know from WikiLeaks that the United States and Israelis discussed Gaza in past years, and there's a piece in the WikiLeaks discussions that basically said Israel was only willing to allow Gaza enough economic activity to barely be above subsistence. It's a fairly, bone-chilling treatment that kind of looked at the way in which Gaza was never set up for success. Why would a nation like Israel think that demoralizing the Palestinians after what they've been doing? I mean, it kind of raises the question, what would the state of affairs on October 6th?
Right. Well, look, if you remember, after Israel's withdrawal from Gaza in 2005, there was all kinds of efforts on the UN, the Clinton Global Initiative, other international NGOs to try to help develop the Gaza Strip. Obviously, that did not work. There was huge and tremendous and quite violent political divisions within Gaza itself. And all those good plans were laid waste as a result of the competition between Hamas and Fatah, the PLO. Since then, the Israelis have sought to essentially cordon off, with the help of the Egyptians, cordon off the Gaza Strip. And as you said, leave it in a subsistence kind of way. The idea was to establish a deterrence between Israel and Hamas. Yeah. That was shattered on October 7th. And it strikes me that the Israelis want to completely wash their hands of the Gaza Strip, but not before they destroy Hamas. However they define it, it is going to be, as you said, something that is unfolding before our eyes that is going to kill many, many people. The Israelis believe that as they intensify their military operations and demoralize the Palestinian public, it will isolate Hamas in Palestinian society. As I said, I don't think that that's likely to happen.
You know, one of America's political leaders who's clearly evolved since this crisis began is Senator Bernie Sanders. He was all in, gave Israel support, was on every level. He's now written a letter to his colleagues and said, America can no longer be complicit in the indiscriminate killing of civilians, and that is Benjamin Netanyahu's plan. He basically says Netanyahu is not at war with Hamas, Netanyahu is at war with the Palestinians, and we cannot be complicit in that, and he's opposing this larger funding package for Israel in that. I'm interested in your views on it, because even you had a case that's just emerged, today. I mean, it's interns, but nonetheless, we have divided institutions. State Department staff resigning or sending letters to Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, basically expressing great concern that we have become unobjective in this relationship. You have 40 interns inside the White House working for the office of the president, the office of the vice president, who have signed a letter that essentially said they have great concern about where this is going. So I'm just interested in what this is doing to us to divide it, and how you think that's going to play.
I think as far as Capitol Hill interns and staff, I think they serve at the pleasure of the people who were elected representatives. If they don't like the policy, they can leave. Interns, it's a privilege to be an intern in the White House. I think that I would take.
I know it's interns, but nonetheless,
yeah, and interns can have differing opinions. But when you sign on to pursue a policy. And
I guess it's interesting not to sign on, but it's an interesting take of the temperature of the times. And when you kind of look at, say, the Democratic arena, which is President Biden's party, you see declining support and a kind of paralysis in this foreign policy matter because of this crisis and the way he's responded, and differences of view inside that party.
It's undoubtedly the case that the politics of Israel is changing in the United States, but in particular within the Democratic Party. But if I could just finish my point on the interns and congressional staff, they have recourse. They have written their letters. They can also resign their positions. It is somewhat in our system. It is somewhat, I think, presumptuous for Capitol Hill staff who were not elected to be taking this position against the people who they serve and against the people who elected the people they serve. But it does speak to your point, which is that there are very, very serious differences of opinion within the United States on the question of our support for Israel, particularly our support for Israel during this military operation that we would not have seen 15, 20, 25 years ago. And I think that it's important to recognize that the politics of Israel is changing in this country in important ways.
I want to play a clip for you from President Biden when he met President Abbas in Bethlehem last year. Let's listen.
So even if the ground is not ripe at this moment to restart negotiations, the United States and my administration will not give up on trying to bring the Palestinians and Israelis and both sides closer together.
Stephen, you've written a powerful piece. It was very depressing for me, but I think it was very realistic on the different perspectives of the players around the Israel-Palestine standoff. Here we have President Biden last year saying that, the situation is not right. It raises the question of whether it will ever be right. Or thinking, as he's now called, for a return to a two-state solution and somehow seeing an Israeli peace camp somewhere being. Take us through the blind spots that each has on the day after solutions for this crisis.
Well, look, I think the administration had not actually really wanted to deal with this issue. President Biden, people forget that as
he shoved it under the rug.
Right, as vice president, he oversaw negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians that were convened by then Secretary of State John Kerry, and he came to the conclusion that there really was no way forward, and had avoided this, other than his meeting with Abbas in Bethlehem, in which he basically mouthed a kind of formula about the two-state solution. I think going forward, I think any plan that the current Secretary of State, Secretary Blinken, about an international force in the Gaza Strip for the day after, a reinvigorated Palestinian authority, an authority that is corrupt, dysfunctional, lacks legitimacy, in part because of its cooperation with Israel and the United States, as well as the fact that Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian, hasn't stood for election. He's in the 18th year of a 4-year term, as people like to say. And I think there is no peace camp. There's no peace camp among the Israelis. I think after this conflict,
we are nonetheless behind closed doors talking about the Palestinian Authority somehow getting, back in shape and back in gear. All the things you write about that say likely can't happen, those are the things we're actually discussing.
Yeah, it's an unrealistic thing, but the administration and I think the people around them, and I think most of Washington, are bereft of any idea about how to go forward. I think the American foreign policy establishment is appalled by what happened on October 7th, has grave questions about the Israeli military operations since then, but doesn't have an answer. Can't bring around into their heads the idea that whatever ideas that we have advanced over the course of the previous 25 or 30 years didn't work then and still don't work now. And my fear is that without those any new ideas, we're going to return to some very, very disturbing version of the status quo in which you have a security regime over the Gaza Strip, destitution of the people on the Gaza Strip, but no real movement towards the resolution of the conflict. I think that's a more likely outcome to this than a two-state solution and real peace negotiation that would finally bring this terrible conflict to an end.
There's another dimension of this, which is not getting a lot of coverage, is what's happening in the West Bank. And settler provocations, even murders, attacks on Palestinians there. This was a distinct and different area that was not engaged in the October 7th Hamas attacks against Israel, and yet violence is rising there. Are we not paying enough attention to the dangers of the West Bank?
Absolutely. I think all the focus has been on the north and Hezbollah, but some of us have been saying that the real danger of escalation is the West Bank. First, there is a reservoir of support for Hamas on the West Bank, and you have a radical settler community that has been empowered by ministers in the Israeli government who are intent on annexing territory in the West Bank and, quite frankly, driving Palestinians from their land. And it is as clear as day that that is what their intention is. Now, the administration, the Biden administration, has begun to sanction some of these people, not giving them visas. Sanctions would hurt, especially among the American contingent, which is larger than people think, among the settler community. But there is a real risk, a real danger of this escalating in ways that could lead to, once again, real concerns about the Palestinian population of the West Bank and where they might go. That is something that ministers in the Israeli government have actually talked about. That is population transfer, otherwise known as ethnic cleansing.
But I would also say that what I see happening to America's standing in the world, I'm not saying it's falling, but it's definitely being assailed by other nations that see us holding to a double standard. We see a deep divide even in Europe right now.
Right. But I wonder, so that is certainly true. But I wonder how different that really is. I mean, what's different is the kind of shocking violence of this war, right? But for as long as I have been working on the Middle East, for as long as you have been working on and traveling through the Middle East, you have heard about America's double standards. Yes. I think so what's different now, that's different from the last 30 years, is that there are actually competitors, near peer competitors to the United States in the world. China being one of them. India is much more influential in the Middle East than it once was. Even Russia, which isn't really a near peer competitor of the United States, has influence in the region and particularly in the global south.
I mean, I've been watching Erdogan and Turkey basically put stakes in this as well.
Right.
Is that a good thing that maybe, as I sort of look at it, the United States has been defending Israel's right to defend itself.
Mm-hmm.
And this defense of itself is resulting in the, thousands of deaths of innocents, while we are still trying to support and aid those innocents. Mm-hmm. It looks like you've given permission to kill, but you're trying to. Right. And it raises the questions of whether we can be truly objective and a protector of both sides, or whether we actually need other players like China, like Russia, like Turkey on the other side of this equation.
Well, of course, I think Turkey has written itself out of this for the United States and as well as for the Israelis. I think both Washington and
by endorsing Hamas.
Well, I mean, calling Hamas a national liberation movement, and of course, The Economist had an extraordinary piece in which demonstrated that Hamas's financial wherewithal is really based on what it has done with Turkish financial institutions. But I think it's important, and you're alluding to a very important point, is that with the rise of other powers in the region as well as in the world, it may actually produce guardrails, right, on the United States. It may force us to do things that we haven't done over the course of the last 25 or 30 years, where we have been the power, and there has been no other. And this may force us to put some guardrails on our partners in the region. It doesn't seem like we've been able to do that so far with the Israelis. And this is where the United States is caught. And this is the point that you make. We're counseling the Israelis not to do certain things, targeting civilians, to be more careful, yet we're helping give them the means to do precisely that. And that's what everybody in the world perceives, and that's a real problem for the United States. I think, going back to the beginning of our conversation, it's because President Biden himself, as well as others in the administration, miscalculated the way in which the Israelis were going to respond. They immediately defined this conflict in existential terms. That's where the bear hug, President Biden's bear hug of Prime Minister Netanyahu, was a miscalculation, because the Israelis interpret that as the president being on board in their existential struggle. A little more distance at the beginning would allow the United States perhaps a little more room now to try to restrain the Israelis. But again, I'm skeptical. When a country defines something in existential terms, no matter who it is, no matter what kind of resources they may have to bring to bear on it, on a problem, it's going to be hard to move the other country, in this case the Israelis, off of what their strategy is. Look, the Israeli public is inflamed by what happened on October 7th, has lurched to the right. Polling demonstrates that even a significant number of Israelis don't believe that the IDF is using enough force in the Gaza Strip. So there's a long way to go before the Israelis stand down.
We're in the middle of a horrible crisis, right? And you've written a piece that said, guess what? There are probably more horrible crises down the road. At the end of the day, do Middle Eastern states, the Abraham Accords, do others come along and look at this incident as a game changer, or do we shove it under the rug and are destined to see this kind of horrible thing happen?
Yeah. First, let me just apologize. I don't mean to be the person who
Pours cold water on solutions.
Well, it's just, I think we do a service by recognizing the limits of American power and what's realistic in this situation. This is horrifying. There's no joy in it for me to say, hey, folks, these solutions that we talk about don't seem to be realistic. I think as far as the Abraham Accords countries go, what's interesting to me is that there have been recalls of ambassadors, but nobody has broken relations with the Israelis yet. We'll see as this unfolds. Whether countries that have become important to Israel, like the United Arab Emirates, like Morocco, like Bahrain, do have a limit here. I think there was a belief that their good offices with the Israelis would help somehow temper the unfolding military operations. But once again, I go back to this existential framing for the Israelis. I suspect that ties are not yet deep enough that there remains an option for these countries to move back away from the Israelis. But thus far, we haven't yet seen it. We've seen tough talk. We've seen those countries move closer to what the Arab consensus has become on this conflict. But again, there's a long way to go. Secretary Blinken told the Israel War Cabinet that it had weeks, and the Israeli defense minister said, we'll take as long as we need in order to achieve our objectives. So
what's your gut? Are we looking at months or are we looking at weeks?
Early on, I thought that this would be wrapped up by January. I no longer believe that to be the case. I think that the push into the south really does change things. I thought the Israelis would isolate the north, kill as many people, Hamas terrorists there as they possibly could, and then target the leadership of Hamas, not push with massive amount of force into the south. And that is giving me pause and thinking that actually they are serious about this. Why serious about going in and it taking months? And this is something very different from the Israelis, who've never wanted to fight a war much longer than 2 or 3 weeks.
And finally, if you were advising President Biden right now, who's trying to influence this, what do you do with the balance of the hostages?
Yeah, I think the hostage situation is extraordinarily tough. First, we don't know how many of them are actually alive, right? And I think that the Israelis have determined that the negotiations that the Qataris oversaw have run their course, and that Hamas really doesn't have the ability to hand people over, don't want to at this point, and that if anything, military pressure will force their hand, perhaps. What I would say to President Biden is, you made a mistake on October 7th and 8th. It was of course appropriate to indicate your support, your shoulder-to-shoulder support with Israel. But the bear hug, the subsequent bear hug, was a mistake, and now you need to figure out a way forward. And one of those way forward is by taking a more public stand yourself. It's one thing for the vice president, the secretary of defense, or the secretary of state to say things, but it's another thing for the president of the United States to speak out publicly about what we see unfolding across the country.
Well, senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, Stephen Cook, I really appreciate your candor and you being with us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So what's the bottom line? The U.S. is taking this approach where it wants more food, water, and medicine to get to the victims of Israel's attack, while it gives Israel permission to keep killing. It's one of the world's worst wars, given the level of death and destruction, even considering that it was triggered by Hamas's attacks 2 months ago. The U.S. government hopes somehow that a reinvigorated Palestinian Authority can somehow be useful, or that Israel will somehow see the folly of abandoning a two-state peace plan. But my guest is right to wonder about these assumptions, especially the chances that a peace camp will ever evolve in Israel. If the international community would step up to become Palestine's protector and a steward for the time being, guaranteeing Palestinian security, autonomy, and civil justice, as well as Israeli security, until a lasting arrangement can be reached, there might be a chance. But for now, all options seem to be dead end. And that, sadly, is the bottom line.
Okay, mag-break muna tayo and then hanap tayo ng balita, no? Okay. So, yan po ang mga analysis ng mga magagaling na tao, no? Ayan. Sandali lang. Okay. Pakinggan natin itong International Court of Justice. Okay, here's South Africa genocide case against Israel. Pakinggan natin ito, no? Okay. Sige. Nakuha kaya ito? Okay. Rinig ba nyo? Mag-feedback kayo, no?
Hi, I'm Steve Clemens, and I have a question. As Israel's
Bakit pumasok daw? Dito tayo mga klaro, no? Dito tayo sa maklaro. Okay, ito. Alisin natin ito. Di klaro. Problema wala sound. Hearing pala ito. Hearing pala ito ng genocide sa International Court of Justice. Mga judge. Dami palang judge nila, no? Wala man. Umpisa na ang court hearing sa International Court of Justice, no? Karami pala yan. Oh. Dami palang judge, no? Judges?
Please be seated.
Baba yung ng mag-preside.
Sitting is open. The court meets today and will meet tomorrow under Article 74, Paragraph 3 of the Rules of Court to hear the oral observations of the parties on the request for the indication of provisional measures submitted by the Republic of South Africa in the case concerning application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, South Africa versus Israel. The court does not include upon the bench a judge of the nationality of either party. Accordingly, both parties avail themselves of the right under Article 31, Paragraph 3 of the statute to choose a judge ad hoc. South Africa has chosen Judge Dikgang Ernest Moseneke, and Israel, Judge Aharon Barak. Article 20 of the statute provides that every member of the court shall, before taking up his duties, make a solemn declaration in open court that he will exercise his powers impartially and conscientiously. Pursuant to Article 31, Paragraph 6 of the statute, that same provision applies to judges ad hoc. Before inviting Judge Moseneke and Judge Barak to make their solemn declarations, I shall first, in accordance with custom, say a few words about their careers and qualifications. Judge Dikgang Ernest Moseneke, of South African nationality, has had a distinguished career as a judge, law practitioner, and academic. After obtaining degrees in English, political science, and law from the University of South Africa, he practiced as an attorney and an advocate with the Pretoria Bar. In 2001, he was appointed a judge on the High Court in Pretoria, and a year later, he became a judge on the Constitutional Court of South Africa, where he was Deputy Chief Justice for more than a decade and Acting Chief Justice in 2013 and 2014. Judge Moseneke is also an honorary professor in the Department of Jurisprudence at the University of Pretoria and has served as a Chancellor of the Pretoria Technikon and the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. Judge Moseneke has received numerous honorary doctorates and awards. I shall now say a few words about the career and qualifications of Judge Barak. Judge Aharon Barak, of Israeli nationality, has had an eminent career as a judge and law professor. He holds a PhD in law from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and served as the Dean of the Faculty of Law of that university between 1974 and 1975. He was appointed to the Israeli Supreme Court in 1978 and served as its president from 1995 to 2006. Prior to joining the Supreme Court, Judge Barak served as the Attorney General of the State of Israel between 1975 and 1978. He has taught law in a number of law schools, including Yale University, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and the Reichman University in Herzliya, Israel. Judge Barak has also written extensively in law and has received numerous honorary degrees and awards. In accordance with the order of precedence fixed by Article 7, Paragraph 3 of the Rules of Court, I shall first invite Judge Moseneke to make the solemn declaration.
Hinihiring ito kaso ng genocide ng Israel versus South Africa, no?
Present to rise. Judge Moseneke, you have the floor.
I solemnly declare that I will perform my duties and exercise my powers as a judge honorably, faithfully, impartially, and conscientiously.
I thank Judge Moseneke, and I now invite Judge Barak to make the solemn declaration prescribed by the statute. Judge Barak, you have the floor.
I solemnly declare that I will perform my duties and exercise my powers as judge honorably, faithfully, impartially, and consciously.
I thank you, Judge Barak. Please be seated. I take note of the solemn declarations made by Judge Ad hoc Moseneke and Judge Ad hoc Barak, and I declare them duly installed as judges ad hoc in the case concerning application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, South Africa versus Israel. I shall now recall the principal steps of the procedure in the present case. On 29 December 2023, the government of South Africa filed in the registry of the court an application instituting proceedings against the State of Israel, alleging violations by the latter of its obligations under the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. I shall refer to this convention as the Genocide Convention. To found the jurisdiction of the court, South Africa invokes Article 36, Paragraph 1 of the Statute of Court and Article 9 of the Genocide Convention. South Africa states that its applications concerns acts threatened, adopted, condoned, taken, and being taken by the government and military of Israel against the Palestinian people, a distinct national, racial, and ethnical group, in the wake of the attacks in Israel on 7 October 2023. South Africa contends that the acts and omissions by Israel of which it complains are genocidal in character because, I quote, they are intended to bring about the destruction of a substantial part of the Palestinian national, racial, and ethnical group, that being the part of the Palestinian group in the Gaza Strip, end of quote. South Africa asserts that the relevant acts are attributable to Israel, which has failed to prevent genocide and is committing genocide, and which has also violated and continues to violate other fundamental obligations under the Genocide Convention. The application contains a request for the indication of provisional measures pursuant to Article 41 of the Statute of Court and Articles 73, 74, and 75 of the Rules of Court. According to South Africa, I quote, provisional measures are necessary in this case to protect against further severe and irreparable harm to the rights of the Palestinian people under the Genocide Convention, which continue to be violated with impunity. South Africa requests that the court indicate provisional measures to protect and preserve those rights, as well as its own rights under the Convention, and to prevent any aggravation or extension of the dispute pending the determination of the merits of the issues raised by the application. End of quote. The registrar will now read out the passage from the request specifying the provisional measures which the government of South Africa is asking the court to indicate. You have the floor, Mr. Registrar.
Thank you, Madam President. I quote, 1. The State of Israel shall immediately suspend its military operations in and against Gaza. 2. The State of Israel shall ensure that any military or irregular armed units which may be directed, supported, or influenced by it, as well as any organizations and persons which may be subject to its control, direction, or influence, take no steps in furtherance of the military operation referred to point 1 above. 3. The Republic of South Africa and the State of Israel shall each, in accordance with their obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in relation to the Palestinian people, take all reasonable measures within their power to prevent genocide. 4. The State of Israel shall, in accordance with its obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, in relation to the Palestinian people as a group protected by the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, desist from the commission of any and all acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention, in particular, A. Killing members of the group, B. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, C. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and D. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. 5. The State of Israel shall, pursuant to point 4c above, in relation to Palestinians, desist from and take all measures within its power, including the rescinding of relevant orders, of restrictions and/or of prohibitions to prevent A. The expulsion and forced displacement from their homes, B. The deprivation of B1, access to adequate food and water, B2, access to humanitarian assistance, including access to adequate fuel, shelter, clothes, hygiene, and sanitation, B3, medical supplies and assistance, and C, the destruction of Palestinian life in Gaza. 6. The State of Israel shall, in relations to Palestinians, ensure that its military, as well as any irregular armed units or individuals which may be directed, supported, or otherwise influenced by it, and any organizations and persons which may be subject to its control, direction, or influence, do not commit any act described in 4 and 5 above, or engage in direct and public incitement to commit genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, attempt to commit genocide, or complicity in genocide. And insofar as they do engage therein, that steps are taken towards their punishment pursuant to Articles 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. 7. The State of Israel shall take effective measures to prevent the destruction and ensure the preservation of evidence related to allegations of acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. To that end, the State of Israel shall not act to deny or otherwise to restrict access by fact-finding missions, international mandates, and other bodies to Gaza to assist in ensuring the preservation and retention of said evidence. 8. The State of Israel shall submit a report to the court on all measures taken to give effect to this order within 1 week, as from the date of this order, and thereafter at such regular intervals as the court shall order, until a final decision on the case is rendered by the court. 9. The State of Israel shall refrain from any action and shall ensure that no action is taken which might aggravate or extend the dispute before the court or make it more difficult to resolve. End of quote.
I thank the registrar. Immediately after the application containing the request for the indication of provisional measures was filed, the deputy registrar transmitted an original copy thereof to the government of Israel. He also notified the Secretary General of the United Nations. According to Article 74, Paragraph 1 of the Rules of Court, a request for the indication of provisional measures shall have priority over all other cases. Paragraph 2 of the same article states that the court shall proceed to a decision on the request as a matter of urgency. This imperative must, however, be balanced with the need to fix a date of oral proceedings in such a way as to afford the parties an opportunity to be represented at the hearings. Consequently, the parties were informed that the date for the opening of the oral proceedings, during which they could present their observations on the request for the indication of provisional measures, had been fixed for Thursday, 11 January 2024 at 10 a.m. I would now like to welcome delegations of South Africa and Israel, and I note the presence before the court of the agents of counsel of both parties. This morning, the court will hear the single round of oral argument of South Africa, which has submitted the request for the indication of provisional measures. It will hear Israel tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. For purposes of this single round of oral argument, each party will have available to it a 3-hour sitting. In this first sitting, South Africa may, if required, avail itself of a short extension beyond 1 p.m. today in view of the time taken up by these introductory remarks. Before I give the floor to the agent of South Africa, I wish to draw the party's attention to Practice Direction 11, which states as follows, I quote, "In oral proceedings on the request for the indication of provisional measures, parties should limit themselves to what is relevant to the criteria for the indication of provisional measures as stipulated in the statute, rules, and jurisprudence of the court. They should not enter into the merits of the case beyond what is strictly necessary for that purpose." End of quote. I now give the floor to the agent of South Africa, His Excellency, Mr. Visumuzi Madonsela. You have the floor, Excellency.
Madam President, distinguished members of the court, it is an honor and a privilege for me to appear before you today on behalf of the Republic of South Africa. I wish to express my gratitude to the court for convening this hearing on the earliest possible date to entertain South Africa's request for the indication of provisional measures in this matter. In our application, South Africa has recognized the ongoing Nakba of the Palestinian people through Israel's colonization since 1948, which has systematically and forcibly dispossessed, displaced, and fragmented the Palestinian people, deliberately denying them their internationally recognized inalienable right to self-determination and their internationally recognized right of return as refugees to their towns and villages in what is now the State of Israel. We are also particularly mindful of Israel's institutionalized regime of discriminatory laws, policies and practices designed and maintained to establish domination, subjecting the Palestinian people to apartheid on both sides of the Green Line. Decades-long impunity for widespread and systematic human rights violations has emboldened Israel in its recurrence and intensification of
Kaso ito, kaso no, kaso yung genocide, pinile po ng South Africa versus Israel.
Omissions by the state of Israel inevitably form part of a continuum of illegal acts perpetrated against the Palestinian people since 1948. The application places Israel's genocidal acts and omissions within the broader context of Israel's 75-year apartheid, 56-year occupation, and 16-year siege imposed on the Gaza Strip, a siege which itself has been described by the director of UNRWA Affairs in Gaza as a silent killer of people. As the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination warned on December 21st, hate speech and dehumanizing discourse targeted at Palestinians is raising severe concerns regarding Israel and other states' parties' obligation to prevent crimes against humanity and genocide in the Gaza Strip. This warning has been followed by a succession of warnings, including by 37 United Nations special rapporteurs, of the failure of the international system to mobilize to prevent genocide in Gaza. Today, we are joined in court by representatives of the Palestinian state, the Palestinians who work in the fields of human rights, including residents of Gaza who were in Gaza just a few days ago. They are some of the lucky ones who managed to get out of Gaza. Their future and the future of their fellow Palestinians who are still in Gaza depend on the decision this court will make on this matter. With the leave of the court, I now call upon His Excellency, Mr. Ronald Lamola, Minister of Justice of the Republic of South Africa, to make South Africa's substantive opening remarks.
I thank the agent of South Africa for his statement, and I now invite the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services for the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency Mr. Ronald Lamola, to take the floor. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and distinguished members of the court. It is an honor for me to stand here in front of you on behalf of the Republic of South Africa on this exceptional case. In extending our hands up is at one. These were the words of our founding president, Nelson Mandela. This is the spirit in which South Africa acceded to the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Crime of Genocide in 1998. This is the spirit in which we approach this court as a contracting party to the Convention. This is a commitment we owe to the people of Palestine and Israelis alike. As previously mentioned, the violence and the destruction in Palestine and Israel did not begin on the 7th of October 2023. The Palestinians have experienced systematic oppression and violence for the last 76 years. On 6 October 2023, and every day since October the 7th, 2023. In the Gaza Strip, at least since 2004, Israel continues to exercise control over the airspace, territorial waters, land crossing, water, electricity, and civilian infrastructure, as well as over key government functions. Entry and exit by air and sea to Gaza is strictly prohibited, with Israel operating the only two crossing points. Given that continuing effective control by Israel and over the territory of Gaza, Israel is still considered by international community to be under belligerent occupation by Israel. South Africa unequivocally condemned the targeting of civilians by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups and the taking of hostages on the 7th of October 2023. And has again expressly recorded this condemnation, mostly recently in its note verbal to Israel on the 21st of December 2023. That said, no armed attack on a state territory, no matter how serious, even an attack involving atrocity crimes, can provide any justification for or defense to breaches to the convention, whether as a matter of law or morality. Israel's response to the 7th of October 2023 attack has crossed this line and give rise to the breaches of the convention. Faced with such evidence and our duty to do what we can do to prevent genocide, as contained in Article 1 of the convention, the South African government initiated this case. South Africa welcomes the fact that Israel has engaged with the case in order to have the matter resolved by the court, after careful and objective consideration of the facts and submission put before it, as the parties to the convention have intended. This hearing is concerned with South Africa's request to the court for the indication of provisional measures and will necessarily have a narrow and particular force. I invoke the words of Martin Luther King when he said, "The arch of the moral of the universe is long, always bending towards justice." South Africa's case will be presented by a team of 6 legal counsels, comprising of Dr. Adila Asim, Mr. Tembeka Nzugaitobi, Professor John Dugat, Ms. Blim Likron, Mr. Max Dupris, and Professor Morgan Lowe. Dr. Adila Asim, Senior Counsel, will provide an overview of the risk of genocidal acts in the perpetual vulnerability to acts of genocide. Mr. Tembeka Nzugaitobi, Senior Counsel, will examine Israel's alleged genocidal intent. Professor John Dugat, Senior Counsel, will focus on the prima facie jurisdiction. Professor Max Duplessis, Senior Counsel, will discuss the various rights currently under threat. Blinny Carl, King's Counsel, will present the argument of agency and potential irreparable harm. And Professor Wagenlow, King's Counsel, will speak on the
Huwag kayo matulog kasi makinig kayo ng hearing.
the court to call on Dr. Asim. I thank you.
Bihira na ito makuha natin mga ganito. Basta ganitong hearing mahaba.
Thank you. Madam President, distinguished members of the court, it is a privilege to appear on behalf of the Republic of South Africa in this case of exceptional importance. It's a case that underscores the very essence of our shared humanity as expressed in the preamble to the Genocide Convention. It's my task to address the court on the genocidal acts that have led to this urgent request for provisional measures under Article 41 of the Statute of the Court. South Africa contends that Israel has transgressed Article 2 of the Convention by committing actions that fall within the definition of genocide. The actions show a systematic pattern of conduct from which genocide can be inferred. Allow me to place these acts in context. Gaza is one of the 2 constituent territories of the occupied Palestinian territories, occupied by Israel since 1967. It is a narrow strip of approximately 365 square kilometers, as depicted in the map now displayed. Israel continues to exercise control over the space territorial waters, land crossings, water, electricity, electromagnetic sphere, and civilian infrastructure in Gaza, as well as over key governmental functions. As the Honourable Minister has said, entry and exit by air and sea to Gaza is prohibited, with Israel operating the only two crossing points. Gaza, which is one of the most densely populated places in the world, is home to approximately 2.3 million Palestinians, almost half of them children. For the past 96 days, Israel has subjected Gaza to what has been described as one of the heaviest conventional bombing campaigns in the history of modern warfare. Palestinians in Gaza are being killed by Israeli weaponry and bombs from air, land, and sea. They are also at immediate risk of death by starvation, dehydration, and disease as a result of the ongoing siege by Israel, the destruction of Palestinian towns, the insufficient aid being allowed through to the Palestinian population, and the impossibility of distributing this limited aid while bombs fall. This conduct renders essentials to life unobtainable. At this provisional measures stage, as this court has made clear in the Gambia-Myanmar case, it is not necessary for the court to come to a final view on the question of whether Israel's conduct constitutes genocide. It is necessary to establish only whether at least some of the acts alleged are capable of falling within the provisions of the Convention. On analyzing the specific and ongoing genocidal acts complained of, it is clear that at least some, if not all of these acts, fall within the Convention's provisions. These acts are documented in detail in South Africa's application and confirmed by reliable, often UN sources. It's thus unnecessary and impossible for me to recount all of them. I will highlight only some in order to illustrate the pattern of genocidal conduct. The UN statistics that are relied upon are up to date as of 9 January 2024. In South Africa's oral submissions, we will illustrate the facts that we rely on with limited use of audiovisual material. Madam President, we do so with restraint and only where necessary, and always with respect to the Palestinian people. Against this background, I move now to demonstrate, in turn, how Israel's conduct violates Articles 2A, 2B, 2C, and 2D of the Convention. The first genocidal act committed by Israel is the mass killing of Palestinians in Gaza, in violation of Article 2A of the Genocide Convention. As the UN Secretary General explained 5 weeks ago, the level of Israel's killing is so extensive that nowhere is safe in Gaza. As I stand before you today, 23,210 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces during the sustained attacks over the last 3 months. At least 70% of whom are believed to be women and children. Some 7,000 Palestinians are still missing, presumed dead under the rubble. Palestinians in Gaza are subjected to relentless bombing wherever they go. They are killed in their homes, in places where they seek shelter, in hospitals, in schools, in mosques, in churches, and as they try to find food and water for their families. They have been killed if they failed to evacuate. In the places to which they have fled, and even while they attempted to flee along Israeli declared safe routes. The level of killing is so extensive that those whose bodies are found are buried in mass graves, often unidentified. In the first 3 weeks alone, following 7 October, Israel deployed 6,000 bombs per week. At least 200 times it has deployed 2,000-pound bombs in southern areas of Palestine designated as safe. These bombs have also decimated the north, including refugee camps. 2,000-pound bombs are some of the biggest and most destructive bombs available. They are dropped by lethal fighter jets that are used to strike targets on the ground by one of the world's most resourced armies. Israel has killed an unparalleled and unprecedented number of civilians, with the full knowledge of how many civilian lives each bomb will take. More than 1,800 families, Palestinian families in Gaza, have lost multiple family members, and hundreds of multi-generational families have been wiped out, with no remaining survivors. Mothers, fathers, children, siblings, grandparents, aunts, cousins, often all killed together. This killing is nothing short of destruction of Palestinian life. It is inflicted deliberately. No one is spared, not even newborn babies. The scale of Palestinian child killings in Gaza is such that UN chiefs have described it as a graveyard for children. The devastation, we submit, is intended to and has laid waste to Gaza beyond any acceptable legal, let alone humane, justification. The second genocidal act identified in South Africa's application is Israel's infliction of serious bodily or mental harm to Palestinians in Gaza in violation of Article 2B of the Genocide Convention. Israel's attacks have left close to 60,000 Palestinians wounded and maimed. Again, the majority of them women and children. This in circumstances where the healthcare system has all but collapsed. I'll return to this later in my speech. Large numbers of Palestinian civilians, including children, are arrested, blindfolded, forced to undress, and loaded onto trucks, taken to unknown locations. The suffering of the Palestinian people, physical and mental, is undeniable. Turning to the third genocidal act under Article 2C. Israel has deliberately imposed conditions on Gaza that cannot sustain life and are calculated to bring about its physical destruction. Israel achieves this in at least 4 ways. First, by displacement. Israel has forced the displacement of about 85% of Palestinians in Gaza. There is nowhere safe for them to flee to. Those who cannot leave or refuse to be displaced have either been killed or at extreme risk of being killed in their homes. Many Palestinians have been displaced multiple times as families are forced to move repeatedly in search of safety. Israel's first evacuation order on 13 October required the evacuation of over 1 million people, including children, the elderly, the wounded, and infirm. Entire hospitals were required to evacuate, even newborn babies in intensive care. The order required them to evacuate the north to the south within 24 hours. The order itself was genocidal. It required immediate movement, taking only what could be carried, while no humanitarian assistance was permitted, and fuel, water, and food, and other necessities of life had deliberately been cut off. It was clearly calculated to bring about the destruction of the population. For many Palestinians, the forced evacuation from their homes is inevitably permanent. Israel has now damaged or destroyed an estimated 355,000 Palestinian homes, leaving at least 500,000 Palestinians with no home to return to. The Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Internally Displaced Persons explains that houses and infrastructure, quote, have been razed to the ground, frustrating any realistic prospects for displaced Gazans to return home, repeating a long history of mass forced displacement of Palestinians by Israel. There is no indication at all that Israel accepts responsibility for rebuilding what it has destroyed. Instead, the destruction is celebrated by the Israeli army. Soldiers film themselves joyfully detonating entire apartment blocks and town squares, erecting the Israeli flag over the wreckage, seeking to re-establish Israeli settlements on the rubble of Palestinian homes, and thus extinguishing the very basis of Palestinian life in Gaza. Second, together with the forced displacement, Israel's conduct has been deliberately calculated to cause widespread hunger, dehydration, and starvation. Israel's campaign has pushed Gazans to the brink of famine. An unprecedented 93% of the population in Gaza is facing crisis levels of hunger. Of all the people in the world currently suffering catastrophic hunger, more than 80% are in Gaza. The situation is such that the experts are now predicting that more Palestinians in Gaza may die from starvation and disease than airstrikes. And yet Israel continues to impede the effective delivery of humanitarian assistance to Palestinians, not only refusing to allow sufficient aid in, but removing the ability to distribute it through constant bombardment and obstruction. Just 3 days ago, on 8 January, a planned mission by UN agencies to deliver urgent medical supplies and vital fuel to a hospital and medical supply center was denied by Israeli authorities. This marked the 5th denial of a mission to the center since 26 December, leaving 5 hospitals in northern Gaza without access to life-saving medical supplies and equipment. Aid trucks that are allowed in are seized upon by the hungry. What is provided is simply not enough. Madam President, members of the court, this is an image of an aid truck arriving in Gaza. Third, Israel has deliberately inflicted conditions in which Palestinians in Gaza are denied adequate shelter, clothes, or sanitation. For weeks, there have been acute shortages of clothes, bedding, blankets, and critical non-food items. Clean water is all but gone, leaving far below the amount required to safely drink, clean, and cook. Accordingly, the WHO has stated that Gaza is experiencing soaring rates of infectious disease outbreaks. Cases of diarrhea in children under 5 years of age have increased 2,000% since hostilities began. When combined and left untreated, malnutrition and disease create a deadly cycle. The fourth genocidal act under Article 2B is Israel's military assault on Gaza's healthcare system, which renders life unsustainable. Even by 7 December, the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to health noted that the healthcare infrastructure in the Gaza Strip has been completely obliterated. Those wounded by Israel in Gaza are being deprived of life-saving medical care. Gaza's healthcare system, already crippled by years of blockade and prior attacks by Israel, is unable to cope with the sheer scale of the injuries. Finally, the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls has pointed to acts committed by Israel that would fall under the fourth category of genocidal acts in Article 2D of the Convention. On 22 November, she expressly warned the following: the reproductive violence inflicted by Israel on Palestinian women, newborn babies, infants, and children could be qualified as acts of genocide under Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, including imposing measures intended to prevent births within a group. Israel is blocking the delivery of life-saving aid, including essential medical kits for delivering babies, in circumstances where an estimated 180 women are giving birth in Gaza each day. Of these 180 women, the WHO warns that 15% are likely to experience pregnancy or birth-related complications and need additional medical care. That care is simply not available. In sum, Madam President, all of these acts, individually and collectively, form a calculated pattern of conduct by Israel, indicating a genocidal intent. This intent is evident from Israel's conduct in specially targeting Palestinians living in Gaza, using weaponry that causes large-scale homicidal destruction, as well as targeted sniping of civilians, designating safe zones for Palestinians to seek refuge, and then bombing these, depriving Palestinians in Gaza of basic needs: food, water, healthcare, fuel, sanitation, and communications, destroying social infrastructure, homes, schools, mosques, churches, hospitals.